Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kirby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. We're going to be talking about all sorts of different topics today, and in some respects wanted to get a few of these out of the way because it's tomorrow going to be a very important day. It is the Republican debate, and those candidates are going to be coming out swinging, and so we'll be talking about a lot of that tomorrow and also on Wednesday. So today we're going to spend some time looking at a couple of books that I thought you would like to know about. One called Faith Steps, and we'll get to that in just a minute. A little bit later this hour, Phil and Kay Robertson will drop by of Ducky Dynasty, have a new book out, Exploring the Joy of Christmas. And in the second hour, Dr. John Wilsey, who's been with us before, American Exceptionalism and Civil Religion. Very eclectic mix of topics, and I think if you are interested in one, stay with it. If you're not interested, just hang around, because we'll get to one that I'm sure will interest you as well. First book out today that we're going to talk about is by Jonathan Imbody. He is the Vice President for Government Relations and directs the Christian Medical Association's Washington, D.C. office. He's been the liaison with the federal government, has actually participated in about 30 different White House meetings and events, and makes over 200 personal contacts with congressional leaders and government officials every year. This is a book that is going to help you understand a little bit more about what faith steps are, the principle behind it, how they work, and then we're going to apply that, if we can, to a couple of vital issues, some of those that we talk about here on Point of View. So, Jonathan, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you, Kirby. My privilege.
We have some information about you on our website. People can also, of course, watch the video, which you did a presentation of this at Family Research Council. So I want to encourage people to find out a little bit more. But explain, if you might, right up at the beginning, the concept of faith steps and what you're talking about in terms of how Christians can interact with the political process.
Well, sure. Faith Steps really is developed, the book itself is developed to encourage and equip Christians to engage in public policy, really as a way to help others, which, as we know from the Bible, is God's purpose for government. It's to promote good and restrain evil. So when we engage in public policy, we're doing the same thing. And the principle of Faith Steps talks about how, as we help individuals make good choices that we as believers and followers of Christ know are aligned with God's principles, we are actually helping them to take faith steps toward a relationship with God through Jesus Christ. And so what we're doing is we're helping others to make moral choices that are aligned with God's principles, and that helps keep them on the track toward a relationship with God.
You know, one of the things that you do early on in the book is quote from Nancy Pearcey, who's been on the program with us many times before, and she talks about the fact that sometimes we separate things into the sacred and secular, and that is, you know, the Bible can certainly apply to my family and to what I do in church, but I probably need to kind of leave that aside when I go into the secular world. But we shouldn't have that dichotomy because, as you said, we as believers should be salt and light. We are campus ambassadors. We're ambassadors to the culture. We're ambassadors to the political process. And so we really have a responsibility to not leave our biblical convictions behind when we go into the classroom or the courtroom or in a governmental place, because indeed we're supposed to take our Christian worldview to every area of life.
Well, that's right. I'm glad you mentioned Nancy. She's a friend of mine. Her writing's been influential in my life, and I'm sure many others. And, you know, it's not just that kind of separation, but we also tend to separate our words and what we do. And so we think that, you know, what we need to do to bring people to Christ is to talk about it. And we know the power of the Scriptures. We know the power of the Word. But we can sometimes lose sight of the fact that when Jesus came to do ministry, he didn't just talk. He had powerful miracles that he also did. He had good works that accompanied his message and gave credibility to his message. And that's what we as believers need to do. First of all, as persons, we need to line up our faith and how we're actually acting. So we just can't go into the public square and start spouting off policies if we're not really representing Christ the way he is, as a loving, compassionate person. And so we need to join those two. And so we can spread the good news, and we can help the poor. We can make disciples, and we can bring healing to the sick. We don't need to dichotomize those two, but we can really imitate Christ, who never dichotomized the two.
Very well said. You did allude to one of the other obvious questions, and that is the importance of character, because sometimes there are problems with style and substance. I mean, I've met some people that really haven't been articulating a biblical worldview. They really don't understand how they would apply their Christian faith. So there's a problem with the substance. But then you have some people that maybe are pretty good on that, but the style, the character, the way we communicate that is going to be very key. And it was always true, but I think it's very true today in this 21st century politically correct postmodern culture, isn't it?
Well, it really is. And to be honest, I think if each one of us looks in the mirror and thinks about how we've communicated, especially when the heat gets on, it gets to be a tough conversation about controversial issues that we really feel strongly about, we would like to go back and maybe change the way we said some things, whether it's to family members or in the public square. So it's something that we can all humbly work on and ask ourselves repeatedly, am I being like Christ to others? Or am I coming across as angry and judgmental, not really caring about the person, but just caring about what I think? These are the kinds of things that if we hope to draw people toward Christ, we've got to be like Christ. And that means a lot of times changing the way we tend to be.
You talk about also fairly early in the book your own personal journey. You were a teenager in the tumultuous 1970s, and you had no intention of devoting your life to God. So share a little bit about that, because that, I think, is important, because sometimes we have to shake off some of the barnacles or the rust or whatever illustration you want to use of our past life before we became Christians, to make sure that the way in which we communicate is one that's God-honoring.
Well, that's a great point, Kirby, and it really is true. You become a Christian, and you're not all of a sudden just like Jesus. You have a lot that you have to work through. In my case, I did grow up in a tough time, and I had some tough experiences too. Not that much different than a lot of folks growing up in those times, and they really caused me to sit down and wonder what in the world was going on, because the Vietnam War was going on, and the social fabric of the nation was just being torn in two, and I thought, nobody seems to have anything to stand on. Then I went to Penn State, and I met some people who just had a character about them. There was a joy and a peace that they had that I really wanted. And I got involved with the Athletes Fellowship there, and I remember going to one meeting, and they were all singing about how they loved Jesus. And I did not love Jesus, nor did I want to sing in front of other people. But these guys were about, 260 pounds, and they made their living keeping people from leaving places. So I was kind of stuck there. And eventually the message sank in, the gospel message, and I realized that I was a sinner, and I really needed not just to change how I lived, but I needed a new life. And I asked God's forgiveness for that, put my faith in Christ alone, and certainly not in any good works. That wasn't even a temptation. I didn't have many good works. So I was just so glad to have this new life. And then, like the Apostle Paul says, you begin to forget about what lies behind, and you push forward toward the upward call of God in Christ Jesus.
Going to take a break. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Jonathan Imbody for just a few more minutes. Book is entitled Faith Steps. We have information about it on the website, and as he mentioned just a minute ago, has both a bachelor's and master's degree from Penn State University. We'll continue our conversation with him right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
You know, a few months ago, presidential candidate Ben Carson caused a furor when he suggested that people should fight back when a shooter enters a building. Now, even some in law enforcement are essentially saying that may be a wise strategy. Recently, the police chief of the District of Columbia was on 60 Minutes. She explained, "The fact of the matter is that most active shooters kill most of their victims in 10 minutes or less, and the best police department in the country is going to be about 5 to 7 minutes response. That fits with something I often say on my radio program. When seconds count, the police are just minutes away." She calmly explained it to Anderson Cooper that you only have a few choices when confronted by a gunman. Either you run, hide, or fight. Apparently, Americans are seriously considering the third option. This year on Black Friday, 185,000 people got background checks on firearms. This was a one-day record in this country. The chief of police for Detroit also talked about citizens fighting back. He argued that Detroiters are fed up, and they're fed up with the violence. He added that he would stand by the right of citizens to defend themselves. Ben Shapiro wrote a column with the title 7 Reasons You Should Buy a Gun After San Bernardino. He argues that you should buy a gun and learn how to use it, not because of the administration wanting to implement gun control legislation. You should do this because the government cannot keep you safe. Many of his reasons had to do with the inability or incompetence of the government to keep us safe from ISIS, to track down terrorists, or to screen refugees coming into this country. Some of his other reasons have to do with the fixation the administration has on guns, gun registration, and gun control. Not so long ago, we were told to call 911 and not resist. The new message seems to be, don't be a victim and fight back. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kirby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Jonathan Imbody with us as we talk about his book, Faith Steps. And if you'd like to know more about him, certainly you can click on his picture, go to the See More button there as well. And we also have an opportunity for you to order this book. It would be something that would be very helpful for you if especially your church is talking about Christian activism or how to get involved in the political process, or even wondering if they should be involved. I think this book not only answers some of those questions, but also gives some very practical helps. And I thought, Jonathan, we might move ahead because you start the book by talking about human trafficking and making a presentation, but chapter 12 is a good example of that as well. And I thought maybe people can understand a little bit more about how to apply some of this by giving them some concrete examples. So how would you apply some of these principles of faith steps when we address this very big and very important issue that we've talked about here on Point of View, the issue of human trafficking?
Well, I'm glad you raised that. And, you know, it's an especially important issue for health professionals because studies have shown that 88% of victims actually go and see a health professional during their captivity, during their ordeal.
Yes.
So it's really crucial that health professionals in particular learn how to spot the signs. And the Christian Medical Association actually offers on their website a CME-accredited way to do that at cmda.org/tip. But the whole issue of health professionals reporting, you would think would be kind of a no-brainer for everybody. But even there are controversies that relate to a person's worldview. And some of that is that some people feel like, well, we're not really going to be rescuing these people, and so we're just going to focus on what's called harm reduction. And the harm reduction approach, for example, if some young girl has been taken in and has been prostituted, or a teenager or even an older woman, and they've been forced to be prostituted, 40, times a day. These health professionals will go in and they will try to teach the women how to advise their clients to use so-called safe sex. They will try to tell the pimps, the traffickers themselves, that they should let these women unionize, and it just gets ridiculous. It just does not at all comport with what I would call the daughter test, and that is, if it were your daughter, what would you do? Well, the answer, of course, is you would rescue them. And so we work hard at training health professionals to learn how to see the signs. Somebody comes in maybe to the ER, and they're accompanied by a man who never leaves their side, who does all the talking for them. They may not know the language. These are some crucial things that should lead a health professional to report this victim to authorities, and there is a toll-free number that they can call also to report and really make a difference in their lives.
Very good. You did mention the connections, of course, to the Christian Medical Association, but I thought I'd also mention we have a link to freedom2care.org. It's freedom2care.org, but of course we have the link there. That's a place where people can get the book, they can get the study guide, their PowerPoint presentations. For just a minute before we get back into that, talk about how some of our listeners, maybe that's a pastor, maybe it's a Sunday school teacher or a small group leader, how could they use this book in some kind of educational form?
Well, thank you. We actually have a free downloadable 13-week study guide that walks participants through the book, and it's a very biblically oriented guide where they're encouraged to see what Scripture says about these issues so that they develop both a theological and then also a practical response for issues. One of the issues that's sweeping the country right now is assisted suicide, which is the close cousin of euthanasia. Mm-hmm. And we need to know how to communicate, not just within the church, that's where we need to start, but we need to communicate with a growing number of non-believers in our country by showing them the harms and benefits in their own self-interest. Why legalizing assisted suicide is basically going to help all those care payers who benefit from your early death. And the benefits of life-honoring policies in hospice and adequate pain and depression treatment are so important. And then we can tell them stories, too. I went to the Netherlands to research this issue, and I talked to a young man whose grandfather had gone into a nursing home in Holland where euthanasia and assisted suicide are very popular. And he asked for help with pain. He had developed a thrombosis in his leg. And he asked the doctor for help with pain. And the doctor who had been immersed in that assisted suicide euthanasia culture took that as a signal for euthanasia. So and
as you point out, this happened before the family could stop the doctor.
Well, exactly. They went and said, we want to give him some water, but we're not allowed to. And the doctor had withdrawn food and water and was giving him massive doses of morphine. He died the next day before they could do anything about it. This is what happens when you begin to adopt policies that are diametrically opposed to the life-honoring principles that we can read in the Scriptures.
I just mentioned that Chapter 8 goes into that, and of course it has your Senate testimony about that and what's been happening in the Netherlands, and again, just a few of the chapters. Let's see if we can talk about another one of the hot-button issues, abortion, stem cell research. You have separate chapters on that, but again, how would somebody want to apply some of these principles of faith steps?
Right. So again, we're taking cues from Moses, who talked about, I've set before you life and death, the blessing and the curse, and then goes on the self-interest, the harms and the benefits. So when you look at abortion, and you can present the research and also the personal testimonies that of women like from Silent No More, who have talked about the psychological and physical harms to women. You can talk about the science. We know that developing babies can feel pain as early as 20 weeks, but they don't have the pain control mechanisms that we do as adults. We can present alternatives of pregnancy centers and adoption that provide options and help. And then the benefit of pro-life position is respect for life protects all citizens, regardless of your disability or perceived quality of life.
Well, again, so many great resources here, and I just might mention again that the book is broken into a section that deals with the idea of faith steps, then how faith steps work. Then we've been talking about just a few of the examples of faith steps in vital issues, and then there's a final one in terms of how to think about this in terms of the government, and the role of Christians and the issue of church, state, and all of the rest. So just before we run out of time, let's again talk about what is available, because you mentioned there is that free download. I'm thinking there are a lot of people that might say, oh, okay, if that's already available, this might be a good Sunday school message as we get close to the beginning of the year, as they begin to plan out their next quarter. 13 weeks fits very well. So talk about how somebody can take this book and the study guide and use that in teaching in a Sunday school class or maybe even in a church service.
Sure. Well, first of all, the book is not a philosophical tome. It's a very practical, biblically oriented book that's really designed for the person in the pew. And so if somebody were to go to Freedom to Care, that's freedom, the number 2, care.org, freedomtocare.org, they can download the free 13-week study guide, which is going to help them integrate the principles of the book, how we can communicate God's principles to people who don't share our faith, how we can think about and present these critical public policy issues, what's God's view of government, and why we should participate. That's all there in 13 weeks, and it's an interactive guide for leaders, for small groups. We had one church that used it for the whole congregation. So there are creative ways that people can use it, but it is free to download at freedomtocare.org.
Again, we have that link, freedomtocare.org, as you mentioned. Also, the video, if people like to watch that, of your presentation before the Family Research Council, that's there, as well as an opportunity for people to get either the paperback or the ebook, the free download. There's some PowerPoint presentations, as well as a number of things on laws and regulations related to everything from Obamacare to contraceptives to charities and other things. And of course, I know you've been working on this issue of conscience protection. So for some of the people that are listening in the audience that are in the medical profession and saying, will I be forced to do something that violates my conscience? Again, you have some great resources, and I always encourage people to go and find those resources at the Christian Medical Association. So thank you so very much for joining us today, and thank you for writing the book, Faith Steps.
Thank you, Kirby. My privilege.
We're going to take a break. When we come back, as I said, we'll be talking with Phil and Kay Robertson for just a little bit. They have a new book out, Exploring the Joy of Christmas. But again, if you are looking for some of the resources that we are talking about today, any one of the books, the good news is simply go to the website, pointofview.net, and then click on the button that says See More. And there are the 3 different books we're talking about. We have links to that, as well as oftentimes articles that are related to the conversation that we're having today, and all of it available at the website, pointofview.net. Now, as we come to the end of the year, don't forget that, again, we are focusing on the fact that as we change individual lives, we change a nation. And if you're concerned about the direction of this nation, one of the best ways to make changes is to change those lives, and radio is certainly one aspect of that, and Point of View is certainly dedicated to doing what it can to make a difference. So if you've benefited individually from some of the things that we are providing to you on this program, we would really challenge you to support this ministry so that collectively we can make a change in the nation. You can go to our website, pointofview.net. There's a button there that says Changing Lives, Changing the Nation, and your generous gift would be greatly appreciated. Let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to hear from Phil and Kay Robertson, Exploring the Joy of Christmas. All that coming up right after this.
This time of year, it seems everyone's looking for a better, more affordable healthcare solution. But with costs rising and options limited, where do you turn? If you're a Christian, you turn to Medishare. It's not insurance. It's over 154,000 believers who share each other's medical bills. It's about half the cost of healthcare insurance programs. And it's fully acceptable under the law. Best of all, Medishare is based on the timeless principles found in God's Word. You never pay for things that go against your beliefs. Medishare is healthcare that fits your family and your faith.
Learn how thousands of Christians can help you save on your healthcare. For your free information guide, call 844-45-BIBLE. Not available in Montana. Medishare, affordable biblical healthcare. Call 844-45-BIBLE. That's 844-45-BIBLE.
A big thank you to members of Truth Team 360. You make this program possible. Not a member yet? Join today at pointofview.net. Click on Donate Now and become a monthly partner. Pointofview.net.
Point of View will continue after this.
listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kirby Anderson.
Privileged to have with us now Phil and Miss Kay Robertson. You are very familiar with them because, of course, the reality series Duck Dynasty. Phil is, of course, head of the Duck Commander Company, author of a number of books, including Happy, 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 My Life and Legacy as a Duck Commander, Unfiltered, The Way I See It. And, of course, Miss Kay, the popular matriarch, is also the author of Miss Kay's Duck Commander Kitchen, Faith, Family, and Food, Bringing Our Home to Your Table. But this new book, which I think you're going to really enjoy, we've got lots of information about it on our website, Exploring the Joy of Christmas, Stories, Recipes, Carols, and more from the stars of A&E's Duck Dynasty. Phil and Miss Kay, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, good to be here.
Phil, I know this is a struggle because I suspect you want to be out shooting ducks right now.
Well, we're in our split right now, so it reopens on Saturday. But what we do is we go down the woods every morning, and then we deer hunt. We're not big deer hunters, just for table fare. We're looking toward the skies, seeing the movement of these ducks. So it's a tough life. We hunt, we come back and eat, then we sleep, then we repeat that. What do you think?
Yes. The other day I was watching one of the videos where you were shooting skeet with Jerry Michalak, and I was shooting skeet and saying, I'd love to be able to shoot as well as some of the Robertson clan someday. But very impressive. But let's get into the book, Exploring the Joy of Christmas. It provides an opportunity for us to really look into your family a little bit more. But also, Miss Kay and Phil, also you go through the different Sundays of Advent, which I would encourage people to do, as well as some of your Christmas movies, carols, and the rest. But Miss Kay, let me come to you for just a minute. Talk about how you celebrate Christmas there in the Robertson family.
Oh, well, are you talking about just when we're all together?
When you're all together, because I know you bring the whole clan together sometimes for those events.
Oh, I'm telling you, we do, and we have the best time. You know, of course, we all eat, and, you know, we just have a great time together and just talk and be real and be with each other. And, you know, I have a rule here, no cell phones at the table.
Good for you.
And if we're, you know, talking and really sharing, no cell phones then either. And my kids have, they tell their friends about it. In fact, Sadie had her dancing partners with Dancing with the Stars. Mm-hmm. And two of them were down here, Mark and Derek, and they both had their phones out, and everybody looked at them, and they looked at me, and they said, oh, no, I forgot, no cell phones at the table. Isn't that correct? And I said, that's correct. They put them up, and they apologized. Wasn't that sweet?
It was. Well, and again, I know you're so proud of how she did on Dancing with the Stars, too.
Sir?
Yes, I know you were excited and very thrilled about how well she did on Dancing with the Stars.
Oh, I was, but she's such a sweet girl, and she had told them ahead of time, do not use your cell phones at the table because Mama Kay will be so mad at you. She'll actually tell you to remove them. So,
of course, they could always be like me and never even own one, never buy one.
That's a good solution for that. Phil, let me come to you for just a minute because early on in the book, there's a discussion about the fact that when you got married, and I guess we should let everybody know that you got married rather young, you were kind of a mess, a first-class mess, I think is the way you described yourself. But obviously God got a hold of you, and that changed everything, didn't it?
Well, I ran with the wicked for 28 years. I finally sat down, and I saw that I wasn't getting anywhere fast. So I sat down with a guy, and he gave some astounding news that I really didn't even know. I didn't even know what the gospel was.
Wow.
God becoming flesh. We remember it as Christmas when that happened. By the way, one of the reasons we wrote this book is that, you know, say what you will, it's 2015 years. Our calendar, for crying out loud, is predicated on Jesus Christ. So we know he was here, or we wouldn't be saying it's 2015 years since he got here. You know what I'm saying?
I do.
So to us, we're like, we know he was here. I would recommend that you investigate him. So at 28, I investigated him, and I was astounded. All my sins would be removed on the cross, guaranteed to be raised from the dead. I'm this way about Jesus of Galilee. until someone comes along and demonstrates to me how they can come forth from the grave. Is there any chance whatsoever without the resurrection of Jesus? I'm open for suggestions and some information. Maybe they have some that I don't know, but I'm all in with it, and we have a big time. We remember Jesus every day, but especially at Christmas. You know, I don't see the downside of loving God and loving your neighbor, do you?
I don't either. Again, this is a Christian program, so we appreciate that and encourage people to get these books as well as many others that we're talking about today and feed their mind and their heart and their soul, but especially spend time in God's Word and to make sure that they apply those biblical principles. Miss Kay, let me come to you for a minute and talk about, you know, it's broken down into the first, second, third, and fourth Sunday of Advent. Can you give us some ideas on how we might be able to use that? Because this is something that would be helpful as we build up to and come to the Christmas season.
Well, you know, we talk about, I know in one of them, I'm sorry, it just doesn't all rattle back to me right quick, because, you know, I'm doing a lot of other things. Besides that, I have people coming in and out of my life almost every day. And so anyway, I'm getting older, so I'm doing my best to try to recall and remember just how we did it. But, you know, one of the things we talked about in there, where we had one of the times when we have our kids they get up and sing and perform, and Reed will get his guitar out and he writes songs and he sings them. But we'll always let the kids do what they want to. The little ones of the girls, they have taken a song. In fact, it's not even a Christmas song. It's Sarah Evans wrote it. There's only one thing that matters. It's God's love.
Mm-hmm.
They sing that, and the sweetest thing they do at the end, Merritt says, you know, that's all that really matters in the whole world is God's love. And then they go from that into singing their Christmas song, and the little ones will pipe in, and even that don't know the words, they'll just start making noise and everything like that. And it's a fun way. I even have had them do a little Charlie Brown Christmas tree before, because just they could do it and they could talk about it. There's just neat things that you can do with your grandkids, or have the kids, recall our Christmases past and different things, like the Christmas our house almost burned down.
Oh, boy.
Nobody forgets that time. But yet what a blessing it was that it didn't, because Phil saved it at 3 o'clock in the morning. I mean, what a wonderful... We reflect on those things that we do. We have other times when I have the kids down here for a special time in that we do the Christmas cookies or different, things that I do with the grandkids and all. So much time. I know people don't have time, but if they could just do special things to make memories with their kids and with their grandkids. If you don't have those, how about somebody's neighbor kids? How about some kids or anybody's kids that need special memories for Christmas? I mean, there's nothing better than that.
We kind of put the book in this Advent form because you have to remember, as shocking as it sounds, I graduated from Louisiana Tech with a master's degree, went back at night and earned my master's in education. Well, I come down here, I taught school for a while, and I told Miss Kay, I said, I tell you what, I said, find us a place down the river. And I showed her that duck call, and I said, I'll build duck calls, but until the duck call business really gets going and it provides a way of living, I said, I'll fish the Ouachita River with nets. I'll sell the fish. I said, when the duck call gets big enough, I said, then the sky's the limit. She said, let's do it.
Yeah, so, and then I said, we'll probably starve to death.
The bottom line is, he came down here, and some of my old football buddies from Louisiana Tech, they visited me one time, and they said, I was patching nets, out there under some big oak trees. And they said, on the riverbank, they said, Robinson, what are you doing? I said, I'm fishing this river here. I said, I'm patching these nets. I said, I'm getting 30 cents a pound on buffalo and gaspargoo, but I'm getting 70 on the cat, so I'm doing pretty good. He said they left, and they said, you talking about an idiot. They said, the guy is an idiot. He has a master's degree, and he's fishing the river and hoping some duck call will take off. 30 years later, the same guys, they came to see me, and they said, Robinson, you're a genius.
Yeah, it's so good. It's such a great story. By the way, that story about almost burning the house down is in the chapter on making the most of Christmas misfires. But let me take a break. We have one of those mandatory breaks. We'll come back and certainly want to ask another question or two, especially out of Phil's Unfiltered, because we've been talking a lot about Sharia law and the Constitution. I've heard him on other radio programs talking about it, so I want to get his comments. And if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212, talking about this new book out, Exploring the Joy of Christmas, Stories, Recipes, Carols, and More from the stars of the A&E Duck Dynasty, Phil and Miss Kay Robertson. And we're going to take a break. We'll come back and chat with them just for a little bit longer, and then, of course, move on in the second hour to some other topics. But if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, and again, privileged to have with us today Phil and Miss Kay Robertson talking about the book Exploring the Joy of Christmas. And I thought, Miss Kay, we might just for a minute talk about how Phil is the hardest person on the planet to buy a present for. And I would imagine some around me might say the same thing. So I said, just give me a Capella's gift card or something like that. That's fine. But you've decided to do something which I wanted to pass on to our listeners, and that is to give each other gag gifts. Talk about that, if you might, for just a moment.
Well, it all started because I was in a bookstore, and I started reading the titles of all the books, and I was thinking, you know what would be funny if I gave Phil that, or if I gave Jason that, or if I gave that to Willie. And I got so tickled in the store, I just kept laughing and laughing. In fact, somebody even asked me what was so funny about the books I was looking at. And I said, it's not books. It's if I gave this book to my husband or, one of my sons. So that's how it all started for me, and that's what I did. And, I gave Phil, of course, Hillary's memoirs.
I did gag.
We gave him a decorative plate of Barack Obama.
And I gagged again.
Yeah. So, and then one of the things, like I gave Willie some horrible-looking pants. I mean, you wouldn't wear them to a dog fight. And he pulled a gag on me because he wore them the next Sunday to church. And told everybody I gave them to him.
Oh, boy. Well, that's a payback, I guess, what we talk about. But again, you just have a lot of fun around Christmas. And I think this is just a great opportunity. Of course, it's the celebration of our Savior's birth, but it's also just a great time for food and family. You've got a number of recipes, carols, even some of your favorite movies and all the rest. So I just think it's an outstanding book, and would really encourage people to get a copy of Exploring the Joy of Christmas. Now, it wouldn't be a good program, Phil, if we didn't at least ask you one controversial question. I'm the controversial guy always getting into these issues, but lately there have been a lot of people saying, what about this with bringing in individuals into this country that believe in Sharia law? You have spoken out on this before about the need for us to come back not only to the Bible, but also to the Constitution. What are your thoughts?
Can you imagine James Madison? He said about the Constitution, he said, the strength of our nation will not be this Constitution, but the laws of God the Constitution is based on. That's the strength of it. He also said, this Constitution is written for a religious and moral people. It is wholly inadequate for any other. So when you stack up the gospel of Jesus Christ, the grace of God, against any religion, including Islam, if you stack that up with all these religions worldwide, Jesus is the image of the invisible God. He's the firstborn over all creation. Through him, all things were created, for crying out loud, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible. All things were made by him and for him. I mean, he's before all things. In him, all things hold together. He's the head of the body of the church. He's the beginning and the firstborn from among the dead. You add it all up and you say, is there anyone big enough to remove all of our sin? Is anyone big enough? Think of the power it would take to raise Christian people from their graves, and they live eternally. So everything worldwide, I've read them all, they pale in comparison. Can you imagine living under Sharia law or allowing someone to come here and reroute and reshape what our founding fathers, who, by the way, were as godly as they could be, and all these revisionists that try to say otherwise, they don't know what they're talking about. Patrick Henry said, it cannot be said too often that this great nation was not founded by religionists, but by Christians. He said, in fact, the United States of America was founded on the gospel of Jesus Christ, which I just have shared here. So when you look at it that way, you say, boy, we have really done a number to ourselves when we ran God out of our schools. He's out of our government for the most part. He's out of all of our major universities. They ran him out of Hollywood, and now some of them rare if we pray to God on a football field. Just think about what America's come down to. I'm afraid we are in extreme danger, Kirby. I really do. I'm worried for us.
Well, that's one of the reasons why we want to do these broadcasts and really educate individuals and especially reach the next generation, some of which that did not get the biblical history and the Christian history of our nation. So we certainly appreciate you standing for truth. And again, the book is entitled Exploring the Joy of Christmas, Stories, Recipes, and Carols and More. It's published by Regner. You can find it in your local bookstore. But Phil, maybe just for a second, we also have a link to duckcommander.com. Talk about what people will find when they land on your website.
Well, they won't be talking to me, that's for sure. Listen, I'm 1 year shy of 70, Kirby, and I made a decision. I've never been on the internet. I've never turned on a computer. I don't own a cell phone. And someone said, "Well, how in the world do you function?" And I always tell them, very peacefully.
Very peacefully. But I do know some of the other Robertsons have put up a website.
I don't have a clue, my man. Just they know about it.
We have a lot of good things on duckcommander.com. And but we have, so much of the family has put out some great books. I'm going to tell you something. It's a joy. I usually cry through all the kids' books. Al and Lisa, who talk about their marriage, it really suffered greatly, but how they pulled it all together to save their marriage. And their book is wonderful for any couple. So Al and Lisa, and then, of course, Jason and Missy have a story of Mia going through all her little, health problems with her being born with a cleft palate. That little bitty skinny girl, since she's 9 years old, has went all over the United States and told her testimony, and then she sings the prettiest song, and there's not a dry eye in the house. And they talk about all the struggles they went through with that. We have Jumpin' Jessica, who hadn't had a perfect life either, but my kids, at least if I can say anything about it, they open it up and tell you the good, bad, and ugly. That's what we do.
Kirby, by the way, I want America to know that if any of them are saying unkind things about me or they're calling me names, trust me, Kirby, I'm not hearing it.
I can believe it.
I'm not here. I'm oblivious to it, my man.
I can see that. Well, again, if you visit the website, you will find a lot of things on apparel and hunting and the stores and some of the books that Miss Kay was talking about. And it's just been a delight to have you on the program. And keep doing what you're doing. And thank you for joining us. And Merry Christmas.
Hey,
Merry Christmas. Thank you for having us.
It's been a great opportunity. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about American exceptionalism. That'll be a good lead in. Certainly Phil has already helped us with that. And that will be the second hour topic. But as you go to the website, you'll find the links to some of the books that we've talked about today. You'll probably find this book in your local bookstore, probably in Bass Pro Shop and Cabela's and all sorts of places. But again, if you are looking for it, there is a place also on our website. And if you enjoy some of the conversation that we've had already, talking about the need for Christians to get involved politically, maybe some ideas that will make your Christmas even more significant, I hope that you will also recognize that we are a faith-supported ministry. We certainly depend upon your financial gifts to bring these programs to you. And so again, we have a button on our website, Changing Lives, Changing the Nation. If we're concerned about the direction of the nation, you just heard Phil Robertson talk about that, then certainly you want to change lives, and we have some great stories that we tell there of individuals whose lives were changed because they listened to this program and began to be involved in politics like Michelle Bachmann, began to get involved in legal issues like Kelly Shackelford. So please take the time to visit the website and to click on that button, and a generous gift would be greatly appreciated. Second hour today, Dr. John Wilsey, as we talk about American exceptionalism and civil religion. All that coming up right after this.
Recently, I've been struggling through a case of what I call the cruds. Pretty common thing for most of us, but if you think about it, not a good thing for those who depend on our voice as part of our work. Kind of like someone who writes for a living suffering broken fingers. But we press on. We do the best we can as God provides, right? Well, that's what I'm asking you to do today. Not to feel guilty or stressed about what you can't do, but to step up and do what you can to support the Truth Team at Point of View. We'd love it if everyone could give $100 a month. If even a small percentage did that, we could greatly expand our impact. Or $65 to underwrite a minute each month. But for many, $1 a day, $30 is a stretch. As God provides, do what you can and help us change the future through changing minds and hearts 1 month at a time. Give online at pointofview.net or using the Point of View radio app, pointofview.net, or call 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151.
Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kirby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kirby Anderson.
When we hear politicians, whether it's presidents or members of Congress or candidates, talk about American exceptionalism, oftentimes it's important to figure out what exactly they mean, because there are proper ways in which we can say this certainly is an exceptional nation in terms of its founding, but sometimes American exceptionalism has meant something very different. And so we're going to try to explore that this hour with an individual who's been on this program with us before, Dr. John Wilsey. He has his PhD from Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary. He's been on the program with us as we've talked about his book, One Nation Under God, an Evangelical Critique of Christian America. And a while back, even before this book just came out, we talked about it, and it is called American Exceptionalism and Civil Religion. He is an individual who is the Assistant Professor of History and Christian Apologetics at Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. He also serves as the Associate Director and the Senior Research Fellow for Faith and Liberty at the Land Center for Cultural Engagement, also at Southwestern. Individual that spends his time teaching history and theology and apologetics to seminarians, to undergraduates, as well as to inmates in one of the largest maximum security prisons in the country. So, John, always great to have you on the program with us.
It's always great to be with you.
Let's, if we can, talk about this idea of American exceptionalism. You, even in some of the material we've made available here, make a distinction between what we might call closed exceptionalism and open exceptionalism. Before we get to some of those distinctions, let's talk about that, because everybody, even in these campaign times and during political seasons, talk about American exceptionalism. Writers talk about this. Most presidents have at one time or another mentioned that phrase. So what are we really talking about here?
Yeah, when I draw that distinction, I'm trying to think historically about the term exceptionalism. I mean, exceptionalism is a term we hear all the time, especially in election campaign seasons. And one thing that's interesting is that candidates never define what they mean.
Right.
They just assume that everybody knows what they're talking about. It's kind of like a term like freedom, which kind of needs to be defined as well. But I do try to think historically when I draw that distinction. Real quick, with closed exceptionalism, what I've found in my research is that this is a sort of an exclusionary way to think about exceptionalism. It thinks about America as a chosen nation, a morally regenerate nation, an innocent nation, and a nation with a sacred land that God has given to Americans to sort of act upon. Whereas open exceptionalism is a different kind of a view of this, that it's much more inclusive, it's much more based upon the founding ideals that are articulated in like the Declaration of Independence or the Bill of Rights. Or a great example that I talk about in the book in open exceptionalism, probably the greatest example of someone who articulated open exceptionalism was Abraham Lincoln.
Mm-hmm.
And he articulates his view of open exceptionalism in his great speeches and writings, particularly the Gettysburg Address and the second inaugural address in 1865, right before he's assassinated.
So again, what we're really talking about in the positive sense are those things that talk about freedom and natural rights, individual dignity, opportunity for recourse, human dignity, those kinds of things. And sometimes it gets perverted into saying that America is the only one, or America is the new Israel, or something like that. Is that maybe a helpful distinction at all?
Kirby, as always, you have nailed it. I mean, you got it. So, like with closed exceptionalism, closed exceptionalism has really hijacked a lot of aspects of Christian theology, a lot of tenets of Christian theology, like the doctrine of election, like the Great Commission, like moral regeneracy, and like sacred land. These are a few theological, positions within Christianity that are clearly articulated in the Scriptures, but then are applied to America and Americans in various ways since the 1600s and 1700s.
And so, again, what we're talking about is something remarkably different. And I thought maybe we would take our way through some of that. But before we do, one other point that needs to be made is the title of your book, American Exceptionalism and Civil Religion. There are other books on exceptionalism. Matter of fact, I've got some on my desk. I think there's one by, for example, Newt Gingrich, and I think even Dick Cheney has one out. So you're not the only person writing about that, but I would say that you're about the only person that ties American exceptionalism to civil religion. Can you explain that?
Yeah. So, civil religion is a sort of a very broad way to think about, a religious expression for patriotism. And what I do is I take American exceptionalism and I locate or situate American exceptionalism as a particular tenet of civil religion. So very broadly speaking, civil religion is sort of a way to think about America and situate America in human history, in the world as a whole, and also even in relationship to transcendence, to God, to ontology, what philosophers call ontology or metaphysics. Certainly we as Christians know and believe in God's providence, and we know that God raises up nations and also, uses nations to bring about his purposes. So where does America sort of fit in God's program, his program of redemptive history? And I believe that we can sort of say that it does in a general way.
And so, again, that's the key part of it, that in a general way, but what about specifically?
Yeah, well, specifically with civil religion can be articulated in one of two ways at least, and this is one of the things I argue in the book. And in one way, it can be articulated in a salvific way, or in an eschatological way, or in a soteriological way. And so it can be articulated in a way where America is seen as the hope of the world. I mean, I just said that Abraham Lincoln is a great articulator of open American exceptionalism. But one of the things he does in his annual message to Congress on December 1st, 1862, very famously, is he calls America the last best hope of earth.
Yes, of course.
Now, that's a very salvific way to think about America. And it's one exception to his usually very eloquent expression of America being, an inclusionist kind of exceptionalist country with a more of a political, sort of a social construct of civil religion. But someone like Reagan would take, he took Lincoln's phrase and turned it and called it the last best hope of mankind. Now, when Reagan uses the term, he uses the term all the time in his speeches and writings. And, he also thinks about America in very morally regenerate terms. He can't imagine that America, he says that America is not the cause of all the ills of mankind. He says that in his 1984 Republican National Convention speech when he accepts the nomination. He has a difficult time understanding any kind of moral ambiguity in American history. So civil religion is expressed in a salvific way whenever America is seen as the hope of the world.
Yes, okay.
But it can also be expressed in a political sense.
Let me hold you there because we're coming to a break, and I want to come back to that other aspect because we have one of those mandatory breaks. But talking about, again, this idea of American exceptionalism, and at a time when sometimes every problem in the world is blamed on America, or the other extreme, America can do no wrong, we need to find a biblical perspective. We'll talk about that with John Wilsey right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
You know, a few months ago, presidential candidate Ben Carson caused a furor when he suggested that people should fight back when a shooter enters a building. Now, even some in law enforcement are essentially saying that may be a wise strategy. Recently, the police chief of the District of Columbia was on 60 Minutes. She explained, the fact of the matter is that most active shooters kill most of their victims in 10 minutes or less, and the best police department in the country is going to be about 5 to 7 minutes response. That fits with something I often say on my radio program. When seconds count, the police are just minutes away. She calmly explained it to Anderson Cooper that you only have a few choices when confronted by a gunman. Either you run, hide, or fight. Apparently, Americans are seriously considering the third option. This year on Black Friday, 185,000 people got background checks on firearms. This was a one-day record in this country. The chief of police for Detroit also talked about citizens fighting back. He argued that Detroiters are fed up, and they're fed up with the violence. He added that he would stand by the right of citizens to defend themselves. Ben Shapiro wrote a column with the title 7 Reasons You Should Buy a Gun After San Bernardino. He argues that you should buy a gun and learn how to use it, not because of the administration wanting to implement gun control legislation. You should do this because the government cannot keep you safe. Many of his reasons had to do with the inability or incompetence of the government to keep us safe from ISIS, to track down terrorists, or to screen refugees coming into this country. Some of his other reasons have to do with the fixation the administration has on guns, gun registration, and gun control. Not so long ago, we were told to call 911 and not resist. The new message seems to be, don't be a victim and fight back. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kirby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Topic today is American Exceptionalism and Civil Religion, Reassessing the History of an Idea. It's published by InterVarsity Press, about 250 pages. Dr. John Wilsey with us, and we have information about him and the book, as well as some free downloads of some of the questions and answers with him that were conducted by InterVarsity Press. So you have quite a bit of material that you can find on our website, pointofview.net. John, we talked about this idea of America as the last best hope for America, for the world, for the nations, and for mankind. But you were talking about some other ways in which American exceptionalism is sometimes described.
Yeah. I was just saying that in one way, civil religion as an overall kind of a broad religious construction can be articulated in a salvific way, where America is the hope of the world, and then it can also be described in a political way, and that is to emphasize, the ideals that America was founded on. Like you mentioned a second ago, natural rights, democracy, the equality of all as expressed in the Declaration of Independence. So this is really kind of, as civil religion can be articulated in two different ways, American exceptionalism can also be articulated in two different ways.
Let's, if we can, then maybe talk about what you call the theological roots of the tree of American exceptionalism. And that goes into, and again, we'll do politics 101 here for just a few minutes. John Locke and certainly the Declaration of Independence and some of that. There is certainly that kind of idea in part in the Declaration. Now, that certainly Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, and Roger Sherman and Benjamin Franklin understood all of that. But certainly some of the, as you say, the roots of the tree of American exceptionalism go all the way back to our founding, don't they?
Yeah, they do, and they go back even before that. The theological roots, they go back to the Puritans.
Sure.
Going all the way back to the 17th century, especially as it's seen in their preaching, in their history writing, in their poetry. The Puritans, I talk about this in the book, that the Puritans invent one of the very first truly American literary genres called the Jeremiad. The Jeremiad appears in their history writing, their poetry, of course, their preaching. And it's a way of it's calling the people back to their to their godly commitment, to their identity as a covenant people, by warning them of their national sins, as it were, and calling them to repentance so that God would not judge them, but would bless them. And so our ideas of American exceptionalism can be traced back, all the way back to the 17th century, to the Puritans of New England in that way.
Well, again, that's a guy, the city set on a hill, and some of those ideas, exactly. Which certainly I think most people can see that, but I was bringing it a little closer to the Declaration because you have this fascinating chart of a sermon from 1777 by Nicholas Street. Now, most people have never heard of him. That's not the important part. It's just in the sermon here, he uses a biblical figure to illustrate everything. So the children of Israel, well, that's the American colonist. Moses and Aaron, those are the leaders of the revolution. Egypt and Assyria, that's Britain. The wilderness, this is the time of trial and testing. The Egyptians, well, those are the British Tories. I mean, all the way down to the Pharaoh is George III. We don't have a problem with that kind of preaching today, but that shows you how in every case there was a sort of almost a one-to-one correlation between some contemporary figure of the 18th century and some biblical figure, and it kind of made me smile. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, isn't it fascinating how they do that? I mean, typology is what we're talking about, and typology is a very common thing that you see in the preaching and the writings of, say, the early church fathers. They see these types in the Old Testament that are fulfilled in the New Testament, which we would say are the antitypes. So an example of this would be like someone like David. David is a type of Christ, is expressed in the Old Testament. He looks ahead. David is a foreshadowing figure to Christ, who would be the antitype in the New Testament, the fulfillment of the type that David represents. And so the early church fathers drew this typology out. They developed this typology out in their writings and their sermons and so forth, and their commentaries. But what the Puritans do, especially in the Revolutionary period, they do this a lot, but especially, like you said, in that Nicholas Street sermon, they take the typology and they extend it out beyond the New Testament, because the Puritans saw themselves as key players in redemption history. So they would actually see themselves and also, other players on the world stage as being antitypes, fulfilling the types of the Old Testament. So I draw that chart out on page 56 of my book to sort of summarize Nicholas Street's sermon. That's the really fascinating thing, is that he goes beyond the New Testament and he sees God is still working out redemption history in his present context.
So again, I think most pastors listening to this right now would say, well, I've never preached a sermon like that.
Right.
But John, can you maybe help us understand where some of the way in which we communicate the gospel today in an American culture, or some of the ways in which maybe televangelists do, or the ways in which some of the leaders that draw upon biblical allusions maybe are, in a sense, engaging in some of the same kind of ideas?
Yeah, I mean, that's a little bit of a tough one, because I certainly don't want to generalize.
I understand.
I sort of speak to my own experience of just being in church and listening to sermons. I think that, possibly, America being seen as a redemptive player in God's overall program and in redemptive history, America being sort of indispensable, or America being the country who has sent out the most missionaries into the world in all of history, and seeing real theological significance in where America has been, what position America plays on the world stage, and what would the world be like without America. I mean, those kinds of questions are deeply exceptionalist, and it's not quite the same as the typology of the Puritans, but it is seeing America in sort of a special, theologically preferred place in the world, And my problem with that is that there's no divine revelation that would ever lead us to draw that conclusion. I mean, God hasn't spoken in terms of where America sits on the world stage. In the absence of divine revelation about that, I think the best thing we can do as Christians is to remain silent where God has been silent.
And, and when we come into this, sometimes people will look at, say, end times prophecy and say, well, America is such a special nation. It's got to be there. So then you go into people saying, well, the eagle in the Old Testament, that's got to be the United States or Babylon or something like that. Because we can't imagine a world without the United States. But I think if we're honest, we recognize, and here's another place that would provide a little bit of humility. There was a time when the largest mission-sending nation in the world was Great Britain. Look where it is today.
Right.
Yeah, and so in some respects, we can learn some lessons by recognizing that God would certainly want to use Americans and even the freedom that we have here. Sure. But God is not bound. There's only one chosen nation, that was Israel, right?
Absolutely. I mean, that's exactly right, Kirby. I mean, I'm glad you said that about Britain. I mean, the idea about exceptionalism can also be historically problematic because, I mean, the whole point of exceptionalism is that, this is the exception to the rule. It's totally unique. It's totally set apart and in no way similar to anything else, any other country. And when we say that America is the strongest country in the world in history, or the greatest force for good, or the center of the economic world, and these ways that you hear others say that there's never been a country like America in history. Well, that's not really true. I mean, the British of the 19th century occupied all of those lofty positions that the United States holds now, but they occupied those positions in the late 19th and early 20th centuries before World War I. So to say that America is the exception to the rule historically is problematic too, not just theologically.
Let's take a break. When we come back, I want to look back in history, since you do teach history. What about this idea of manifest destiny? We also, of course, mentioned Abraham Lincoln and what we can learn from him, and then we'll fast forward to the 20th century, and certainly you have some things to say about that as well in terms of not only a chosen nation, but a commissioned nation. So a lot more to cover. It's in the book, American Exceptionalism and Civil Religion, Reassessing the History of an Idea, to provide a little bit of history, but also some guards to make sure that we communicate it biblically, as well as we think about some of the great things that have happened in this nation, but to have that in the right and proper biblical perspective. Might just mention that the forward is by John Fee. John Fee's been on this program with us many times before, teaches history at Messiah College, and so we'll talk about that and have some of that material on our website, pointofview.net. And as we go to a break, let me just again encourage you, for now and the end of the year is a great time to make a special gift to Point of View. We certainly do need to hear from you, and if you can help us out, we are listener supported and appreciate those of you that have supported us in the past. But I know that many of you perhaps have been listening to this program for many years and have never made a gift, and I would encourage you to visit the website, pointofview.net. Click on that button that says Changing Lives and Changing the Nation. If we want to turn the nation around, we certainly need to change lives, and we're dedicated to that, and hope that you'll consider what you might do to support this ministry. Let's take a break. We'll continue our conversation with Dr. John Wilsey right after this.
This time of year, it seems everyone's looking for a better, more affordable healthcare solution. But with costs rising and options limited, where do you turn? If you're a Christian, you turn to Medishare. It's not insurance. It's over 154,000 believers who share each other's medical bills. It's about half the cost of healthcare insurance programs. And it's fully acceptable under the law. Best of all, Medishare is based on the timeless principles found in God's Word. You never pay for things that go against your beliefs. Medishare is healthcare that fits your family and your faith.
Learn how thousands of Christians can help you save on your healthcare. For your free information guide, call 844-45-BIBLE. Not available in Montana. Medishare, affordable biblical healthcare. Call 844-45-BIBLE. That's 844-45-BIBLE.
A big thank you to members of Truth Team 360. You make this program possible. Not a member yet? Join today at pointofview.net. Click on Donate Now and become a monthly partner. Pointofview.net.
Point of View will continue after this.
listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kirby Anderson.
Final half hour. If you'd like to join our conversation today as we talk about American exceptionalism and civil religion, feel free to give us a call, 1-800-351-1212. This may be one of those programs where you might just want to sit back and listen. And of course, tomorrow when we spend some time talking about the upcoming Republican debate, we'll certainly take a lot of your phone calls then, but just wanted to give you that opportunity if you'd like to join us. 1-800-351-1212. The book, American Exceptionalism and Civil Religion, published by University Press. We have information about it on our website, and I hope that you'll take the time to read a little bit more of some of the material that we've posted there and perhaps get a copy of the book as well. Let's talk about some positive and negative examples, because, John, some people might say, well, okay, it's only words, but sometimes words matter. What about this idea of manifest destiny? John L. O'Sullivan and the closed exceptionalism of manifest destiny. How did that play out in terms of our history?
Yeah, that's just, to me, that's one of the most fascinating parts of American history. So John L. O'Sullivan's a New Yorker. He is a Democrat in the 19th century, pre-Civil War. He is the editor, he's the founding editor of a journal, a very influential journal in the antebellum United States called the United States Magazine and Democratic Review. And in December of 1845, actually July 1845, and also in December of 1845, John L. O'Sullivan uses this term, manifest destiny. He coins this term, manifest destiny. Yes. And he's using the term to refer to the annexation of Texas. He's talking about how it is God's will for Americans to possess and to settle, and to take Texas and absorb Texas into the Union, but not just Texas, all of the territory going all the way to the Pacific Ocean, perhaps even Canada and Mexico as well, perhaps even South American continent as well, so that the flag would fly from pole to pole. The key aspect of this is that it's God's will that Americans possess the North American continent. It is inevitable. It is the democracy. American democracy is the pinnacle of human civilization. And so this is what he's talking about. This is what he means when he refers to America's manifest destiny. To overspread the continent, it's God's will, and God is going to ensure this is going to happen. It's an inevitability of history.
So again, this is kind of spreading civilization to the rough and ready territories, the wilderness, if you will. You've even got a picture here of the darkness receding as you have the approach of American civilization. I mean, you see how triumphant all of that is.
Yeah.
And of course, we know that manifest destiny was used for, when we talk about, the treatment of Indians and all sorts of things. Yeah. It became a justification for a whole lot more. And again, we don't want to lay all of that blame at the feet of John O'Sullivan, but at the same time, you've got to recognize that, as I said a minute ago, words do have a meaning, and words do have an impact, even in terms of public policy, don't they?
Yeah, they do. They do, and it's really amazing. I mean, when you read O'Sullivan's writings in his magazine, in United States Magazine Democratic Review, there's two aspects of manifest destiny that come up all the time. One is the sense of providential certainty, or a certainty when it comes to talking about God's providence. I mean, he talks about the providence of God like we might talk about a weekly forecast. He's absolutely certain about what God is up to, and that's the one aspect of it. And then the second aspect is there's a pretty virulent racism that permeates all of O'Sullivan's writings, directed mainly towards Native Americans, towards Mexicans, and towards African American slaves. His view of Native Americans is that they're destined to be eradicated. His view of Mexicans is that they're destined to be amalgamated into American society. And his view of African Americans is that eventually they will disappear from the North American continent, but they will thrive in the Caribbean and in Central America. So it's pretty. I mean, some of his language is pretty, arresting as you read him. But the key aspect that I find really fascinating is this providential certainty. How certain he is. He doesn't see himself as a predictor of events. He sees himself almost as a prophet of events. and how they're going to unfold. He has an article talking about what America will be like in 1945, 100 years after the annexation of Texas. And he sees himself in a prophetic way in a lot of his writings.
That's amazing. Just before we move off of the 19th century, let's talk about the positive. I certainly gave the probably the most significant negative, but the positive you mentioned was Abraham Lincoln. And with the exception of the one comment you made before, talk about what that looks like, because whether it's the Gettysburg Address or many of the other messages and speeches by Abraham Lincoln, we have an understanding of the use of the proper term of exceptionalism and the understanding of natural rights and the Constitution in a way that has really provided the greatest freedom that we've ever enjoyed.
Yeah. I mean, Lincoln, you got to love Lincoln. He's fascinating. So, like one example of this is Lincoln believes very strongly in God's providence, much like O'Sullivan did. But what's fascinating about Lincoln is he is very hesitant to make any kind of certain statements about God's providence. He thinks that doing that is presumptuous. There's an episode where some clergy come to visit him in 1862. The war is going badly for the Union, and these clergymen say, well, we know that God is on our side. And Lincoln says, I disagree with you. He says, I'm mainly concerned not so much about God being on our side. I want to make sure that I and the nation are on God's side. Because if you're on the side of right, then you're on God's side. You see him kind of bring this out in the second inaugural address, where he talks about the providence of God, but he talks about it in a way that we don't really know what God is doing, which is really fascinating. Someone who believes in the providence of God very strongly, but because it's God we're talking about after all, we can't know what God is up to. His ways are very mysterious, and sometimes God's ways are, not revealed to us. And I think that without saying that Abraham Lincoln is a Christian, because I don't know if he was or not, but that is a very Christian way to see God's providence, to believe in it and to know that God operates that way, but to be very humble about making pronouncements about what exactly God is up to without divine revelation to guide you in that. So that's one of the ways that Abraham Lincoln is an open exceptionalist. He doesn't think of himself as a prophet like O'Sullivan does. He sees himself as a humble servant of God in the way, in the situation that he has been put in.
Well, again, let's see if we can then go to the 20th century. Yeah. And you have a section here about the commissioned nation, and especially John Foster Dulles. Now, if you'd ask the average person out there on the street, John Foster Dulles, they go, I don't know who it is. Wait, isn't there an airport near Washington, D.C. named for him? That's about all they would know. But you call this the commissioned nation. And even for people that have never even heard the name John Foster Dulles and knew that he was Secretary of State, he's had a profound impact on our world and even the way in which we perceive America's place, especially in the post-Cold War period, right?
Absolutely. And, Dulles is one of these other just really fascinating people in American history. He has this incredible pedigree. On his mother's side, which would be the Fosters, they're diplomats. So his grandfather was Secretary of State under Benjamin Harrison. His uncle was Secretary of State under Woodrow Wilson. And then his father's side, the Dulles men, were ministers. He's got a grandfather who was a missionary to India. His father himself was a theologian who taught at Auburn Theological Seminary in New York and was also a pastor. So he's got this amazing, mainline Presbyterian / diplomatic pedigree that he's drawing from. But Dulles is also problematic. I mean, he sees America as having a divine mandate to go out there and defeat godless communism. And he actually calls on the Great Commission and sees the Great Commission in very Americanized terms. May I read you a passage from his, a very brief passage?
Sure. Well, we've got about a minute to a break. Why don't we wait, and I'll just go to the break, and then we'll come back and do that. And again, this is part of the book on the commissioned nation. But again, you can see some of this because here, on the one hand, a diplomat on one side of the family, pastors on the other, and it kind of plays itself out. So let's take a break. And if you're just joining us, we're talking with Dr. John Wilsey. His book is entitled American Exceptionalism and Civil Religion, Reassessing the History of an Idea, forward by John Fee, who has been with us before as a professor of history at Messiah College. So you have two individuals that are participating in the book, one forward, of course, the other the author of the book, and we have that information at our website, pointofview.net. Click on See More. You'll see some information certainly about John Wilsey that will take you to johnwilsey.com, his website. But then also we have information about the book, and then some material from InterVarsity Press, which will give you an excerpt from the preface that is in the book as well. Let's take a break. We'll come back with more right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
John Wilsey with us for a few more minutes as we talk about his book, American Exceptionalism and Civil Religion. You were talking about John Foster Dulles, and I think you had a quote from him. Again, he served as Secretary of State, and I think it illustrates only so well why we should pay attention to some of the words that politicians actually have, and especially what a Secretary of State might say about the future of America.
Yeah. So Dulles says he says this in a speech. He cites Matthew 28. That he gives in the speech, and he says Jesus told the disciples to go out into all the world and preach the gospel to all the nations. Any nation which bases its institutions on Christian principles cannot be but a dynamic nation. The American people availed of every opportunity to spread their gospel of freedom, their good news throughout the world. So again, I mean, this is seeing America in biblical terms. And,
very much so.
And the gospel being defined by Dulles as not a gospel of salvation through Christ, but through an American conception of democracy and freedom.
You then talk about his legacy, because a lot of people say, well, he's not around anymore, but this shows up again. I mean, you mentioned Jimmy Carter, you mentioned Ronald Reagan, to mention just a few. So what about that? Because it seems to me that we still have some of those strains that are in existence today.
Yeah, and I don't get to go into this too much in the chapter on Dulles, but there's a good book I'd refer your readers to called The Brothers. It's by Stephen Kinzer, who's a journalist and an author. It came out in 2013. But one of the things that Kinzer talks about in his book and outlines in his book is that John Foster Dulles pursues a foreign policy and gets America deeply involved in places like Southeast Asia, particularly Vietnam, in the 1950s. He gets us involved in
By the way, I
Iran.
might mention the brothers are Alan Dulles and John Foster Dulles, in case people don't know what the brothers are. Go ahead.
Exactly. But our involvement in Vietnam and also in Iran.
There you go.
Those things have long-ranging ramifications that we're still dealing with now, and he gets us involved in those places because he has this very messianic vision of American foreign policy and America's place in the world.
We could continue, but I know I'm almost out of time, and I wanted to have, in just a couple of minutes that we have left, to maybe have you talk to pastors, because I know that you spend a fair amount of time, of course, educating everything from undergraduate to seminarians, and of course you even teach inmates at the largest maximum security prison. But a lot of people say, well, I'm not running for public office, I'm not a presidential candidate, but we have a lot of people that teach Sunday school classes or pastors or things like that. Where would you maybe encourage them to consider drawing the line, and what kind of rhetoric certainly fits well with biblical ideas, and what certainly is opposed to some of those biblical concepts?
Yeah, so like when you think about the Declaration of Independence and the statements that the Declaration makes about human dignity and human rights, those fit very well in a theology of God's creating man in His own image, as we're taught in Genesis 1, Genesis 2, Genesis 9, Psalm 8, various other places. Being made in the image of God entails certain things about human. And so, in that sense, is that exceptional? Yes, absolutely. Yes, we can, because America is different than all the other countries in dignity and human rights. That's a very powerful aspect of open American exceptionalism, and it's one of the ways we can say America is exceptional without hijacking Christian theology to do it.
So again, that would be one. One of the questions. Direction, and I can certainly appreciate the benefits of this nation, this wonderful nation, and you call yourself a patriot, but on the other hand, I also will apply a biblical critique to some of the errors and mistakes that a nation might make as well.
Absolutely, and they don't see themselves. I mean, they came to create a Christian commonwealth, but not even they see themselves as being perfect. Quite the opposite. They know that they're sinners and that they're in constant need of being called back to righteousness. And this is what the Puritans called self-examination. Mm-hmm. And a national self-examination is also a very important part of the American tradition, American political tradition. And so, whenever we dissent against the government and against its foreign policy or domestic policy or what have you, we're actually engaging in a process of national self-examination. And we have to be careful that, we don't want to blame America first for everything. That's a knee-jerk reaction that's inappropriate. But where America deserves blame, justice demands that we call Americans out, call our nation out, and work to correct. That's part of the great heritage of America, is that we have worked in 250, almost 250 years of correcting our errors. We're not perfect. We're still not perfect. But hopefully we, as Americans, will continue to look at our nation and call ourselves back to our founding ideals.
And that connects up very much with the interview we did in the first hour with Jonathan Imbody on his book, Faith Steps, and the need for Christians to be involved, but also provide a biblical critique. Well, John, I appreciate your work, and I have a link to your website. It is johndwilsey.com, but you don't have to remember all that because we have a link there, and people can find out about both of your books and get a signed copy of it if they like, and also correspond with you. If they'd like to follow you on Facebook, we have that link there as well. So there are all sorts of different ways in which they can participate in the conversation, even as we finish the program. So, as always, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
It's always fun to talk to you, Kirby.
We're going to take a break, and let me mention that tomorrow, you know where we're going. We have a Republican debate, and I predicted a couple of months ago it would probably be a yawner. Everybody be focused on Christmas. Not anymore. There may be more people watching that debate tomorrow night than ever because of some of the comments by Donald Trump about Muslims and some of the reaction, as well as the tremendous rise of certainly a few people. Ted Cruz fits into that category, and maybe even a little bit of the decline of Ben Carson. There'll just be all sorts of things happening tomorrow night. So we're going to look at a little bit of giving you a preview tomorrow of what I think will happen in the debate. Then we're going to have a lot of time to cover it on Wednesday. So I hope that you will stay with us through this week. I know we're getting closer to Christmas, but if you can listen to the program, we appreciate you doing so. And if you can help us financially, again, we're coming to the end of our fiscal year, the end of our calendar year. All of it's kind of coming together here all at once. And so if you can help us out financially, this is certainly a time in which we would love to hear from you. So again, you can go to the website, pointofview.net, click on that button that says Changing Lives, Changing the Nation. And if you would like to support us, we would appreciate you doing so. If you'd like to go back and listen to some of the broadcasts that we provided today, you can certainly do that by clicking on that button that says Watch or Listen. You can even watch us at our YouTube channel and find some of the material that we've talked about. So please take the time to visit the website, pointofview.net. Take advantage of all the resources. Since we've talked about 3 different books with 4 different authors, that would be a way for you to participate with us. And we most importantly would encourage you to support us if you can. I want to thank everybody working behind the scenes to make this program happen. Andrew, Catherine, and Chris, we'll see you tomorrow.
This time of year, it seems everyone's looking for a better, more affordable healthcare solution. But with costs rising and options limited, where do you turn? If you're a Christian, you turn to Medishare. It's not insurance. It's over 154,000 believers who share each other's medical bills. It's about half the cost of healthcare insurance programs. And it's fully acceptable under the law. Best of all, Medishare is based on the timeless principles found in God's Word. You never pay for things that go against your beliefs. Medishare is healthcare that fits your family and your faith.
Learn how thousands of Christians can help you save on your healthcare. For your free information guide, call 844-45-BIBLE. Not available in Montana. Medishare, affordable biblical healthcare. Call 844-45-BIBLE. That's 844-45-BIBLE.